Let's see, there we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, for this important hearing. I do want to start by echoing something from my colleague from Connecticut and bringing attention to our ports of entry. Somehow this keeps getting politicized. If, in fact, the United States wants to be serious about stopping the flow of illicit substances into the United States, we must remember there's a southern border and a northern border, and there's two water borders, and then you go down and you remember the Gulf of Mexico with our water ports. Don't forget about our airports. The screening or lack thereof that is done at our ports should alarm all of us. 5 or 6% just improved to 10% with passenger screening into the southern border is embarrassing. The United States must adopt 100% screening into the United States with commercial goods and with passenger traffic at all of our ports of entry. Only then will we start to understand how these cartels and other entities are throwing product at the problem. So I hope that we can at least come together there and work together to get something done. By the way, one of the last pieces of legislation that was signed by President Trump was a bipartisan initiative challenging the Department of Homeland Security to tell Congress how to get to 100% screening of our ports. Let's find a way to work together. Second, Mr. Chester, I appreciate the attention to the illicit financial markets. The United States should be embarrassed by the lack thereof process that we have with prosecuting against illicit financial markets. And it's not just Democrat or Republican administrations. It is both. When major financial institutions in the United States are found to be laundering money for cartels, and the outcome is no one goes to jail, someone gets a fine, well, that's just the new cost of doing business. If someone can make that much money and only get fined, it's going to continue. If there's one thing that all these bad people have in common and what's happening here, it's that they're making money. And until you stop the flow of that money, you're not going to stop any of this. And so I'm hopeful that these are some areas, I know we're not in the Committee of Jurisdiction, but some areas that we can find some common ground to go after these entities that are not politicized. Now, the questions that I have, I want to echo a statement that was made earlier, pushing on buprenorphine or improving screening at ports of entry in America. Dr. Delphine Rittman, does the United States need to adopt both access to treatments as well as trying to stop these movements of these illicit substances from around the world into the United States?
Thank you for that question, Senator. And, I can certainly speak to the work of SAMHSA, and I know Mr. Chester has comments in terms of the movement. It does seem that we're taking a multi-level approach, and so certainly there is quite a bit of work underway to increase access to medication-assisted treatment, as well as other vital prevention and recovery services and supports as well. And it does sound like there is quite a bit of work in terms of work at the border as well. But in terms of SAMHSA's, the programs and initiatives that we have in place, both through the SOAR, so State Opioid Response Grant, as well as the Substance Abuse Treatment Block Grant, there are a range of services and supports available across the country to help individuals that are struggling with opioids, to include the dissemination of fentanyl test strips, which allow for the testing of substances and allow for the testing of the presence of fentanyl.
Dr. Delphine Rittman, would access to fentanyl testing strips save more lives?
So what we are seeing is that fentanyl test strips do allow for the identification of fentanyl and substances that is helpful for individuals that are not interested in, that don't want to take fentanyl. Often what we find is that harm reduction programs also disseminate information about how to access services. Often people are connected with a recovery coach or recovery programming. So the harm reduction offers an opportunity to sort of disseminate the fentanyl test strips, but also to disseminate information about how to navigate and access services and supports as well.
I believe access to those strips will save lives. It alarms me that in some states, those strips are treated as illegal use or treated in a way where people can't use them. I hope that the one thing we can do is come together to ensure that access to strips, things of that nature, is something that can be accessible across the United States. I do have other questions for the record that I will submit. The one point that I wanted to raise, though, is according to the CDC, only about 1 in every 10 American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hispanic people with substance use disorder reported receiving treatment. So the number is about 70% of the 2 million folks across the country that are not getting any treatment, predominantly in rural and Native American communities, and in Hispanic communities, Black communities, other communities of color as well. I appreciate that there's more attention being brought to these, but again, what's been happening? The data shows where this is occurring, and there's still no response. Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, I'm certainly hopeful that as we have this conversation and we are moving to move legislation to encourage more and demand more access to mats, but that we understand where the data is based on the number of folks that we're losing, while we also stop these illicit financial markets and we improve dramatically and require 100% screening at our borders to begin to make the drastic steps necessary to be able to get our hands around this. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the